Darius the Great, King of Kings, stood in the center of a silent, scorched wasteland, his 700,000-man army starving and chasing ghosts. He wasn't being defeated by a rival empire, but by an invisible nightmare of horse archers who laughed as they vanished into the horizon. Long before the Huns or the Mongols, the Cimmerians, Scythians, and Sarmatians were the undisputed masters of the Great Steppe, warriors who drank from the gilded skulls of their enemies, and whose women fought so fiercely they birthed the Greek legends of the Amazons. They didn't just fight wars, they invented a new kind of terror that brought the Roman, Persian, and Assyrian empires to their knees. But how did a civilization this dominant, which pioneered the very tactics that would later allow Genghis Khan to conquer the world, completely disappear from the map? To understand the fall of the empires we know, we must first uncover the terrifying rise of the warriors history forgot. Imagine an enemy with no cities to sack and a speed that defies the limits of the ancient world. Long before the Mongols or the Huns, the vast Eurasian steppe belonged to the original horse lords, the Cimmerians, the Scythians, and the Sarmatians. From the master archers who humiliated the Persian Great King Darius to the iron-clad, heavy cavalry that challenged the Roman legions, these tribes reshaped history through blood, gold, and steel. Today, we uncover the 1,000-year epic of the nomadic warriors who ruled the world from the saddle. The Great Steppe wasn't just a landscape. It was a 4,000-mile-long ocean of grass stretching from the borders of China to the mouth of the Danube. To the great city builders of antiquity, the kings of Assyria, the pharaohs of Egypt, and the emperors of Rome, this was the void. It was a place where civilization ended and chaos began. But for the nomadic tribes, this was the ultimate high ground. What made these warriors an existential nightmare wasn't just their brutality, it was their total lack of vulnerability. In the ancient world, power was measured by what you could see: walls, temples, and grain stores. If you attacked a Persian city, you knew where to find it. You could burn their crops, besiege their gates, and starve their people. But how do you besiege a ghost? The Cimmerians, the first of these horse lords to gallop into the written record, realized a terrifying truth. In the vast openness of the steppe, mobility was the only currency that mattered. They were the first to weaponize the horse on a mass scale, evolving from simple charioteers into the world's first true cavalry. They didn't just ride, they lived in the saddle. When they descended upon the Near East in the 8th century BC, they didn't play by the rules of civilized warfare. They struck like lightning and vanished before the dust from their hooves even settled. They shattered the Phrygians, humbled the mighty Assyrians, and proved that a king's crown was worthless if he couldn't catch the man who took it. We've been taught to view these people as barbarians, primitive, chaotic, and unwashed shadows on the periphery of real history. But when archaeologists finally peeled back the earth of their massive burial mounds, they didn't find the crude tools of savages. Instead, they unearthed a hoard of gold so intricate, so sophisticated, and so blindingly beautiful that it forced us to rethink everything we knew about the primitive nomads. These weren't just raiders. They were a hidden superpower with a culture as rich as the empires they terrorized. While the Cimmerians opened the door, it was their successors, the Scythians, who turned the Great Steppe into a global fortress. By the 7th century BC, they didn't just inhabit the land. They possessed it with a religious ferocity. To the Greeks, they were Scythae, a name that became a universal shorthand for the nightmare from the east. These weren't just men riding animals. They were a biological fusion of man and beast. They perfected the composite bow, a marvel of ancient engineering made of layered wood, horn, and sinew that could punch through bronze armor from 100 yards away, while at a full gallop. But the true terror lay in their fundamental logic. In the world of the civilized, power was built on permanence, cities, temples, and fixed borders. To the Scythians, permanence was a death sentence. They carried their homes on massive ox-drawn wagons, their wealth in portable gold, and their authority in their quivers. They were a society of ghosts that could mobilize 50,000 warriors in a heartbeat. If an empire marched against them, the Scythians didn't defend a border. They simply burned the world in front of the invader. They didn't need to defeat an army in a single day. They only needed to let the sheer, suffocating vastness of the earth swallow their enemies whole. This was scorched-earth warfare, thousands of years before the term was ever coined. Yet, for all their tactical genius and the blinding splendor of their golden hordes, the Greeks wrote about them with a shuddering revulsion. They told stories of warriors who drank wine from the gilded skulls of their first kills and wore the tanned skin of their enemies' right hands as gloves. You might think this was just ancient propaganda, a way for the civilized world to demonize the barbarian other. But as modern archaeologists began to peel back the permafrost of the frozen burial mounds in the Altai Mountains, they discovered something chilling. The legends weren't exaggerations. The truth was actually much, much darker. When Soviet archaeologists cracked open the frozen kurgans of the Altai Mountains, they didn't just find breathtaking gold. They found perfectly preserved warriors buried with quivers made from the flayed skin of human arms. The Greek nightmares were true. Scalping wasn't just a gruesome hobby, it was a terrifyingly strict economic system. You brought an enemy's head to the chieftain to claim your share of the loot. Empty-handed meant you got nothing. But this calculated brutality wasn't just for show. It was a psychological weapon about to be tested against the ultimate superpower. In 513 BC, Persian King Darius the Great marched a staggering 700,000 men into the steppe to wipe the Scythians off the map. It was supposed to be a total annihilation. Instead, the Scythians refused to fight. They dragged Darius deeper into the void, poisoning wells and burning every blade of grass along the way. The greatest army in human history was reduced to chasing shadows while slowly starving to death. Furious and desperate, Darius sent a rider to the Scythian king, demanding he stop running and fight like a man. The reply he received is legendary. The Scythians didn't send a declaration of war. They sent a bird, a mouse, a frog, and 5 arrows. The decoded message sent a chill down the Persian king's spine. Unless you can fly like a bird, burrow like a mouse, or hide in the water like a frog, you will be slaughtered by our arrows. Darius didn't wait around. He abandoned his own sick and wounded in the dead of night and ran for his life. The Nomads had shattered the Persian illusion of invincibility without fighting a single pitched battle. The Scythians were now the undisputed lords of the earth. But out on the steppe, supremacy is always borrowed, never owned. Deep in the east, a new storm was already gathering. These new riders didn't just want to outrun empires, they wanted to crush them head-on in heavy iron. And their women fought so viciously, they were about to burn the legend of the Amazons into the pages of history. By the 3rd century BC, the Scythian Golden Age violently snapped. The architects of their doom, the Sarmatians, they were cousins by blood, but opposites in execution. The Scythians mastered the hit and run. The Sarmatians, they invented the steamroller. They didn't just armor the rider, they armored the horse. We are talking about the world's first true cataphracts, shock cavalry completely encased in overlapping scales of bronze, iron, and horn. They traded the lightweight composite bow for the contos, a brutal 2-handed lance that could skewer 2 men at once. When a Sarmatian charge hit an enemy line, it didn't pierce it. It pulverized it. Even the mighty Romans, boasting the greatest infantry on earth, had never faced a metal tsunami like this. To survive, Rome didn't just fight them. They copied them, forever altering the DNA of the Roman military. But Rome's true nightmare wasn't just what was hitting them. It was who was holding the lance. Greek historians whispered terrified rumors of fierce female warriors who amputated their right breasts to draw a bowstring without interference. They called them the Amazons. For centuries, modern scholars laughed this off as pure mythology, a Greek fantasy. Then the shovels hit the dirt. Recent excavations of Sarmatian graves across the steppe revealed a jaw-dropping reality. Up to 20% of the warrior kurgans unearthed belonged to women. They weren't buried with jewelry or spindles. They were entombed with armor, battle-scarred bones, and arrowheads embedded in their skeletons. The Amazons weren't a myth. They were real flesh and blood, riding side by side with men and burying axes into the skulls of their enemies. These matriarchal warlords dominated the steppe for centuries, pushing relentlessly into Europe. The Sarmatians had become the undisputed apex predators of the ancient world. But their absolute dominance came with a fatal blind spot. They were so fixated on the glittering wealth of Rome, they completely missed the apocalyptic shadow rising in the east. A terror so unimaginable, it was about to wipe the horse lords off the face of the earth. The shadow wasn't a plague. It was a new breed of killer, the Huns. By the late 4th century A.D., they erupted from the east like a force of nature. The Sarmatians thought their heavy iron armor made them invincible. They were dead wrong. The Huns brought a radically redesigned asymmetrical bow, firing heavier arrows with a devastating, armor-piercing punch. They didn't charge the Sarmatian lines. They rode circles around them. The unstoppable metal tsunami of the Sarmatians was suddenly too slow, and their riders were turned into metallic pincushions. But the Huns didn't just win battles. They triggered an apocalypse. The Huns didn't just conquer territories. They displaced entire populations. This sparked a violent continental domino effect known as the Migration Period. The proud lords of the steppe, the surviving Sarmatians and Alans, were forced to run. The apex predators of the ancient world were suddenly refugees, begging at the gates of the Roman Empire for asylum. Rome arrogantly let them in, thinking they could exploit these legendary warriors as cheap mercenaries. That was the deadliest mistake Rome ever made. The very tribes that built the steppe civilization were now inside the gates, and they began tearing down the Roman borders from within. The Alans, direct descendants of the Sarmatians, didn't just assimilate. They rode completely across Gaul, plunged into Spain, and carved out new kingdoms all the way down in North Africa. The original horse lords were effectively dissolving into the melting pot of a crumbling Europe. But if they vanished from the map, why does their ghost still haunt modern history? Their empires fell, but their blueprints survived. They didn't die out, they evolved. Their heavily armored cataphracts became the direct inspiration for the medieval European knight. Think the legend of King Arthur and his heavily armored cavalry is just British myth? Modern historians now believe it was directly inspired by a unit of 5,500 Sarmatian mercenaries, Rome, stationed in ancient Britain. The horse lords didn't lose history. They wrote the script for the next 1,000 years. Yet, to truly understand the sheer scale of their genius, we have to look at the one piece of forgotten technology that made their entire 1,000-year reign possible. You'd think it was the bow, or the heavy iron armor. It wasn't. It was the horned saddle. Before this, riding a horse into combat was a massive gamble. You gripped the animal with your bare knees and prayed you didn't fall off. But the steppe nomads engineered a rigid, wood-framed saddle with 4 pronounced horns that physically locked the rider's thighs in place. It sounds basic, but it was the ancient equivalent of mounting a stabilized turret on a modern tank. It gave them a completely hands-free firing platform. They could spin 180 degrees at a dead sprint and shoot backward with pinpoint accuracy. But this mechanical genius came with a grotesque physical price. When modern osteologists finally examined the skeletons pulled from those frozen kurgans, they found a nightmare. These warriors rode so relentlessly, starting as toddlers, that their actual bone structure was permanently warped. Their lower spines were violently compressed. Their femurs were severely bowed. They were quite literally biologically fused to their animals. On foot, they waddled. They were slow, clumsy, and vulnerable, but locked into that saddle, they were untouchable. And this biomechanical edge didn't just win battles, it broke the ancient global economy. Because civilized armies couldn't outrun or outmaneuver them, empires had to bankrupt themselves just to survive. The Chinese built the Great Wall. The Persians dug massive defensive trenches spanning hundreds of miles. Rome bled its imperial treasury dry, paying them protection money. The entire ancient world was restructuring its wealth not to defeat the horse lords, but simply to keep them out. Yet, the ultimate fate of these warriors wasn't extinction by the sword. It was something far more insidious. When geneticists recently sequenced the DNA pulled from those ancient, blood-soaked graves, they didn't find a dead, erased civilization. They uncovered a hidden genetic empire. The DNA results were a revelation that shattered the myth of their extinction. These warriors didn't die out, they merged. When the Scythians and Sarmatians disappeared from the maps, they didn't vanish into the ether. They stepped out of their saddles and into our bloodlines. Their genetic signature didn't just survive, it thrived, flowing through the marrow of modern populations from the Caucasus to Western Europe. They aren't a lost chapter of history. They are the silent ancestors of the modern world. But their true immortality isn't biological, it's cultural. We have been taught that civilization is defined by the stone walls we build, but the horse lords proved that true power lies in the freedom to move past them. Every time you see the silhouette of a medieval knight in shining armor, you are looking at the direct evolution of the Sarmatian cataphract. Every time a story is told of a legendary heroine leading an army, you are hearing the echo of the real-life Amazons who bled into the steppe soil. They didn't lose the war against time. They infiltrated it. They forced the greatest empires of antiquity, the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans, to rewrite their own identities just to survive the encounter. They pioneered the tactics that would later allow the Mongols to forge the largest contiguous empire in history, and they engineered the technology that defined the age of chivalry. The Cimmerians, Scythians, and Sarmatians were the first to realize that the world wasn't a place to be fenced in, but an ocean of grass to be mastered. They were the ghosts in the machine of history, the warriors who traded the permanence of stone for the immortality of the wind. They didn't vanish into the horizon, they became the horizon. The empires of the sun and the stone have long since crumbled into dust, but the spirit of the horse lords remains restless, uncontained, and eternal. The mystery of how a civilization so dominant could simply vanish from the map finds its answer not in a graveyard, but in the mirror. The Cimmerians, Scythians, and Sarmatians didn't face a final defeat. They underwent a total metamorphosis. When the Huns pushed them off the steppe, these horse lords didn't just run. They injected their DNA, their technology, and their soul into the very empires that once feared them. Darius the Great may have chased ghosts, but those ghosts became the architects of the Middle Ages. The heavy iron of the Sarmatians didn't rust away. It evolved into the plate armor of the European knight. The mythical Amazons weren't a Greek fever dream. They were a testament to a society where merit was measured in blood and skill, not gender, a concept that would take the civilized world another 2 millennia to rediscover. Even the tactical brilliance of the scorched-earth defense, which broke the back of the Persian Empire, remains the ultimate deterrent in modern warfare. These warriors paid a staggering price for their mastery, twisting their very bones to fuse with their mounts. But in doing so, they broke the chains of permanence. They proved that power isn't found in the height of your walls or the gold in your treasury, but in the terrifying, limitless freedom of the horizon. The empires of stone have all fallen, buried under the weight of their own static history. But the horse lords? They never stopped moving. They are the wind across the Ukrainian plains, the genetic whisper in a billion heartbeats, and the silent pioneers of the world we live in today. They didn't just ride through history. They rode until history itself couldn't keep up. The ultimate lesson of the horse lords is a radical reimagining of what it means to endure. We are taught that civilization is defined by the monuments we leave behind, temples, walls, and cities carved in stone. But the Cimmerians, Scythians, and Sarmatians proved that stone eventually crumbles into dust. True immortality isn't found in a fixed point on a map. It's found in the speed of an idea and the resilience of a spirit that refuses to be caged. They didn't build walls to protect their legacy. They became the horizon so their legacy could never be besieged. They remind us that history isn't just a collection of dates and ruins. It is a living, breathing evolution. When you feel the thrill of absolute freedom, or witness the courage of those who defy traditional boundaries, you are feeling the pulse of the steppe. They were the architects of a world without borders, a world where merit was forged in fire and survival was a work of art. The horse lords didn't just survive the ancient world, they engineered the future. They are the silent proof that even when the empires of stone fall, the spirit of the nomad, restless, invincible, and eternal, rides on forever. The horse lords didn't just survive history, they engineered it, trading the permanence of stone for the immortality of the wind. If you're ready to see how this nomadic blueprint eventually forged the largest contiguous empire in human existence, click the video on your screen to witness the rise of the Mongol storm. Or to ensure you never miss our next deep dive into the hidden forces that built the modern world from the shadows, join us on this journey now. The empires of stone have crumbled, but the horizon is still calling. Step into it.